Just a quick reminder, for ad-free access to Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs, please join the Officers Club at patreon.com/shipwreckspod. Or you can subscribe to Into History at intohistory.com/shipwreckspod. Also, remember, all episodes moving forward have full-length videos at youtube.com/@shipwreckspod. Thank you and enjoy the episode. It's 210 BC. A merchant ship cuts through the choppy waters of the Mediterranean, its sturdy hull creaking under the weight of its exotic goods. Her captain, Philemon of Rhodes, stands at the prow, the salty wind tugging at his dark, graying hair. The sun is setting low in the western sky, casting a golden sheen over the restless waves. Philemon squints into the horizon. "There it is," he murmurs, his voice tinged with awe. His first mate, Callistos, leans forward, shading his eyes with his calloused hands. "The Pharos?" Philemon nods. "Yes, the Pharos of Alexandria." He recalls the architectural wonder of his homeland, the statue of Helios, what we now know as the Colossus of Rhodes. But it was destroyed 16 years prior, in 226 BCE. The Pharos rising before him would have dwarfed the Colossus. As the ship draws closer, the towering structure emerges more clearly from the hazy harbor. The three-tiered structure stands prominently against the backdrop of Alexandria, looming above them like a watchful guardian. Philemon had heard of this new wonder from other mariners, but had yet to experience its glory for himself. He had assumed the stories were exaggerated, but indeed, the Pharos of Alexandria was more impressive than he ever imagined. The crew of Philemon's ship gathers at the starboard side, their excitement gradually turning into a silent awe as they gaze at the lighthouse. They too had heard the whispers of its existence. Philemon smiles. It is said that its light can be seen for 50 miles on a clear night. It's a symbol of hope and safety for those of us who live by the sea. As the ship nears the port, the bustle of Alexandria comes into view. Ships of all sizes jostle for space, and dockworkers shout orders in a dozen languages. The air is thick and hot, tinged with the aroma of spices and fish. Their own cargo of spices from the east and pottery from Rhodes will soon be offloaded. Philemon disembarks his ship with his first mate, and makes arrangements to purchase a cargo of grain to take back to the markets of Rhodes. The following morning, with his ship now loaded and resupplied, the ship departs. Sailing out of the harbor, Philemon looks up at the lighthouse one last time, its flame flickering in the twilight of dawn. He nods and quietly salutes. "To the Pharos." In solemn agreement, his first mate whispers, "To the Pharos." Lighthouses of the World, today, on Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs. Hello and welcome to Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs, tales of mishaps, misfortune, and misadventure. I'm your host, Rich Napolitano. When we think of lighthouses, we often think of a lonely tower overlooking a stormy sea, or maybe a serene structure presiding over a quaint village. The dutiful lighthouse keeper making sure the light never goes out. Lighthouses have long been the subject of shipwrecks and legends, mysteries, and even hauntings. This will be the first episode in a series, and every now and then I will release a new episode featuring various historic lighthouses. A dedicated niche of lighthouse enthusiasts travel the globe to visit them, checking them off a list much like a birder might keep a life list of birds spotted. The study of lighthouses, their structure, and function is called phairology, from the Greek word pharos, meaning lighthouse. The word Pharos itself comes from the island of Pharos, off the coast of Alexandria, Egypt. Pharos was the location of one of the most famous lighthouses ever to exist, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Lighthouse of Alexandria. Ancient history records evidence of small hilltop fires being used as beacons for mariners, notably at the Greek harbor of Sigeon in the 7th century BCE, and at Piraeus in the 5th century BCE. But to call these structures lighthouses would be a fairly large exaggeration. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BCE, he ordered a city to be built in his name, at the small fishing village of Rhakotis. The city expanded in influence, knowledge, and prestige, and after the death of Alexander in 323 BCE, Ptolemy I ordered a lighthouse to be built on the island of Pharos, and construction began around the year 300 BCE. Ptolemy I did not live to see its completion, but it was completed during the reign of his son, Ptolemy II, in approximately 280 BCE. A grand causeway made of stone and earth was also built to connect Alexandria to the island of Pharos. The causeway was named the Heptastadion, being of 7 Greek stadia, or about 3/4 of a mile. Not only did this provide easy access to the island, but it created 2 excellent harbors to serve the city. The lighthouse was much more than a navigation beacon. It projected the might and power of Alexandria as an architectural and structural marvel for the ages. According to Pliny the Elder, it was designed by Sostratus of Cnidus, although historians do not all agree on this. We are not entirely certain of its exact features or dimensions, but according to the records we do have, it was built from limestone, sandstone, and granite, and was sectioned into 3 tiers. It had a rectangular base, an octagonal midsection, and a cylindrical top section. A winding interior staircase led up to the apex of the lighthouse, which was adorned with a cupola, itself topped by a statue. Depictions on Roman coins show statues of Triton at its 4 corners, and a statue of Zeus, or possibly Poseidon, at its top. The lighthouse was a fantastic achievement and a glorious monument to the prestige of Alexandria. Descriptions of its height vary from 300 to 450 feet, and again, this is debated by historians to this day. Arab historian al-Masudi measured the first section to be 110 cubits in height, the second to be 60, and the third tier was about the same as the second. This would roughly translate to about 350 feet. He also described an inscription to Zeus on the east-facing side, and a mirror at its top, under a wooden cupola. The source of its light is much debated as well. Some accounts describe a giant curved mirror made of polished metal, possibly bronze, to reflect sunlight during the day. Other accounts describe a blazing fire at night. Perhaps the lighthouse utilized both of these, as it would seem to make sense to have a beacon made from fire after sunset. Some have speculated the mirror was used as a superweapon, to aim at enemy ships and set them on fire. This burning mirror was attributed to Archimedes, believing the heat ray was used at the Battle of Syracuse in 213 BC. But no evidence exists of such an invention by Archimedes. The historian Polybius wrote of the siege of Syracuse in the late 2nd century BCE, and he would have been able to speak with survivors of the siege. Polybius made no mention of any such mirrors or death rays. The lighthouse may have had a large reflective device, but it certainly was not used as a weapon. The Pharos of Alexandria was one of the tallest man-made structures in the world for over a millennium. The only structure that was certainly taller at the time was the Great Pyramid of Giza. Even Julius Caesar was awed by the Pharos. As he described it, it was, "of great height, a work of wonderful construction." Caesar was so impressed by it that he had a scale model of the lighthouse paraded through Rome. In 796, a major earthquake rocked Alexandria, causing significant damage to the Pharos. Structural changes and restoration efforts took place, and in the late 9th century, Egyptian ruler Ahmed ibn Tolan later had a mosque built with a wooden dome built at its top. Earthquakes in 951 AD and again in 956 AD caused the cylindrical 3rd tier to collapse, destroying it and the cupola on top. Cracks formed in the lower tiers, threatening the integrity of the structure. Although now about 70 feet shorter, the lighthouse still stood. A series of more earthquakes and a devastating tsunami between 1303 and 1323 caused further collapse. Through the writings of historian al-Makrizi, we know that by 1375, the Pharos was completely destroyed, and the site was in ruins. In 1479, Sultan Qait Bey constructed the citadel of Qait Bey at the site, using some of the ruins of the lighthouse. Much of the lighthouse fell into the Mediterranean, but stone pillars of pink granite laid in plain sight for hundreds of years. French engineer Gaston Jondet rediscovered underwater ruins of the lighthouse in 1916, and UNESCO researchers further investigated in 1968. A team of French marine archaeologists again rediscovered the ruins in 1994, on the bottom of Alexandria's eastern harbor. Numerous items were catalogued, including massive blocks of granite, 30 sphinxes, 5 obelisks, and stone columns with inscriptions. Today, efforts are underway to add the underwater ruins of the lighthouse to the World Heritage List of submerged sites. The Lighthouse of Alexandria stood in one form or another for 1,500 years, and is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. At the very southern tip of a long, isolated peninsula in County Wexford, Ireland, is the Hook Lighthouse. The peninsula forms the eastern border of Waterford Harbor, so named after what the Vikings called Vadra Fjord, meaning weather estuary. In the 5th century, a monk named Duvan built a monastery at Hook Head, and used fire as a beacon to warn ships of the treacherous rocks below. A medieval period church was later built on the site of Duvan's monastery. Today, this land is called Rhin Duvain, in Irish meaning St. Duvan's Head. The similar Irish word duan means fishhook in English, and the name became anglicized into Hook's Head. The lighthouse tower was constructed on the site by Sir William Marshall. Marshall was the first Earl of Pembroke and a well-renowned knight, having served under 5 different kings. The exact year of the construction of the lighthouse is unknown, but it is believed to have been built between 1210 and 1230. Marshall had established a port about 30 kilometers north and wanted to protect the ships coming and going from his port and protect his investment. The earliest known records show the existence of the lighthouse in 1247, where it is described as a beacon for ships. The lighthouse was constructed near the water's edge, at the top of a low, rocky ledge. The tower is 36 meters high, 12 meters in diameter, and has walls that are 4 meters thick. Skilled tradesmen, as well as the monks who still resided on the site, helped build the lighthouse. The cylindrical tower was built with limestone from local quarries and consisted of 4 floors with coal storage on the bottom floor. Inside is a spiral staircase of 115 steps leading to various alcoves and chambers with medieval-era fireplaces, windows, and doors. The ceiling of the tower is stone rib design, providing a fire break between the beacon fire above and the interior rooms. The lighthouse was fueled initially by coal and wood, and tended to by the monks of the monastery for hundreds of years until 1641, when they were replaced by lighthouse keepers. In 1671, a new coal-burning lantern replaced the beacon fire. In 1791, a whale oil lantern was installed, 12 feet in diameter, with 12 internal lamps. 3 small cottages were built for the lighthouse keepers in the 1860s, and gas lights were installed in 1871. Paraffin oil then became the primary fuel in 1911, and a mechanical device was added to make the light flash instead of being continuous. This mechanism required the lighthouse keeper to wind it every 25 minutes. Electricity was finally installed in 1972, with the light being controlled with switches. In 1996, lighthouse keepers left the Hook Lighthouse for the last time, as it became fully automated. It is now controlled remotely from Dún Laoghaire and overseen by the Commissioners of Irish Lights. In 2001, the Hook Lighthouse was opened as a tourist attraction, and lighthouse keepers' cottages were turned into a visitor center. Its foghorns were turned off in January 2011, as technology on board modern ships deemed them obsolete. The Hook Lighthouse is the oldest, intact, operational lighthouse in the world, standing tall for 1,200 years. Mariners have long feared submerged rocks and shoals since the beginning of seafaring. Among the most infamous of these are the 3 reefs known as the Eddystone Rocks, or simply just the Eddystone. Located about 14 miles off the coast of Plymouth, these reefs lie far from land, but at the entrance of Plymouth Sound. The Eddystone has been the cause of innumerable shipwrecks and great loss of life through the ages. Author of Robinson Crusoe, Daniel Defoe, wrote of it. In the entrance to this bay lies a large and most dangerous rock, which at high water is covered, but at low tide lies bare, where many a good ship has been lost, even in the view of safety, and many a ship's crew drowned in the night before help could be had for them. The first lighthouse to be built at the Eddystone was built by Henry Winstanley. Winstanley was an eccentric engineer, inventor, architectural engraver, and entrepreneur. He was known for creating Winstanley's Waterworks in London, located near Hyde Park. This popular attraction featured automatons, fountains of water, fireworks, and other curiosities. In 1696, he showcased his Wonder Barrel, which could serve cold drinks and hot drinks at the same time from the same barrel. He even turned his home into an attraction called Winstanley's Wonders, where he installed a turnstile and charged visitors an entrance fee. His whimsical contraptions delighted his visitors. Winstanley was perhaps a genius ahead of his time, and a bit of a P.T. Barnum prototype. In 1696, Winstanley paid £5,000 to join an investment group and was commissioned to build a lighthouse. He and his workers found the work expensive and difficult. He described his frustrations himself.
Nothing could be attempted to be done but in the summer season. Yet at times the weather would prove so bad that for 10 or 14 days together the sea would be so raging about these rocks that though the weather should seem to be calm in other places, yet here it would mount and fly more than 200 feet. And therefore all our works were buried or exposed to the mercy of the seas.
Making matters worse, England was in the midst of the 9 Years' War with France, and the English Channel was a dangerous place to be. Winstanley requested and was granted a warship to protect him while he was at work. But one unfortunate morning in June of 1697, the warship was absent. A French privateer vessel took the opportunity to kidnap Winstanley and destroy his work. Winstanley was taken to France and imprisoned in Paris. Hearing of this curious kidnapping, King Louis XIV soon released him, saying, "France is at war with England, not with humanity." The king presented Winstanley with gifts and returned him to continue his work on the lighthouse. Henry Winstanley had designed, not surprisingly, a whimsical tower that looked more like an elaborate church tower. Its cylindrical lower section was made of brick and anchored to the rocks with iron cables. An octagonal section of stone and wood made up the second tier, with a wooden cupola on top, with fanciful ironwork and even a weather vane. The lighthouse would be lit by 12 candlelit chandeliers. The following year, the 40-foot structure was completed, and the candles were lit for the first time on the 14th of November, 1698. During that first winter, the candles were frequently washed out by the waves, and the lighthouse creaked and groaned during storms, terrifying the lighthouse keepers. Winstanley made improvements, widening the base and making the structure 40 feet higher. In 1699, he added more decorative platforms and ironwork, making it look even more baroque and whimsical. Winstanley, not missing an opportunity, sold drawings of the lighthouse, depicting him fishing out of one of its upper windows. Again, author Daniel Defoe weighed in. The famous Mr. Winstanley undertook to build a lighthouse for the direction of sailors, and with great art and expedition finished it, which work stood to admiration and bore out many a bitter storm. Mr. Winstanley frequently strengthened the building by new works and was so confident of its firmness and stability that he said he only desired to be in it when a storm should happen, for many people had told him it would certainly fall if it came to blow a little harder than ordinary. For 5 years the lighthouse did not encounter any serious problems, and Winstanley made continual adjustments and additions. In November of 1703, he finally got his chance to ride out a storm in his creation. He left Plymouth for the Eddystone to make further improvements during a lull in the weather. Later the same day, the wind shifted, and what became known as the Great Storm of 1703 slammed into Plymouth Sound. The wind and waves pummeled the structure and washed it and its occupants into the sea. Henry Winstanley and 5 others were never seen again. Days later, the cargo vessel Winchelsea approached Plymouth with a load of tobacco. Its captain was unaware that the lighthouse had been destroyed, and ran straight into the Eddystone. The ship and its cargo were lost, along with many of its crew. This was yet another reminder of how badly a lighthouse was needed at the Eddystone. After the destruction of Winstanley's lighthouse, Captain John Lovett of Cornwall leased the Eddystone for 99 years, and through an Act of Parliament was permitted to charge passing ships 1 penny per ton. He hired London silk merchant John Rudyard to build his lighthouse. While not a trained architect or engineer, Rudyard worked with local shipwrights to design a stable and functional lighthouse. Finished in 1709, the conical and more traditional lighthouse was built from granite and oak, and secured to the rock below with 36 iron rods, sealed in place with molten pewter. The lighthouse was well built and dutifully performed its job until 1755, when the wooden lantern house caught fire. The keepers were able to escape, but the lighthouse was completely destroyed. Trinity House placed a lightship at the Eddystone until a new lighthouse could be built. In 1756, engineer John Smeaton designed a 59-foot stone structure, using the shape of an oak tree as inspiration. Local granite was used, rugged miners from Cornwall were hired, and Smeaton invented an ingenious quick-drying cement. The lighthouse was completed on the 16th of October, 1759, and its 24 candles were lit. His design proved to be very sturdy and withstood the harsh conditions of the Eddystone. In 1807, the lease of the Eddystone had expired, and ownership and management was transferred to Trinity House. The candle lanterns were replaced with oil lamps and parabolic reflectors. Later, the lighthouse was painted the now familiar red and white bands to increase its visibility, and a 500-pound bell was installed to be sounded in foggy weather. By the 1870s, the rock supporting the lighthouse began to crack and give way. The lighthouse itself was holding up well, but its rock foundation was not. A new lighthouse was commissioned, and the top portion of Smeaton's lighthouse was dismantled and installed at Plymouth Hoe in honor of Smeaton and his lighthouse that served for 120 years. The remaining bottom portion of the lighthouse can still be seen on the Eddystone to this day. The final lighthouse at the Eddystone was constructed in 1882 and opened by the Duke of Edinburgh, who set the final stone. Designed by James Douglas, it was originally 161 feet high and made of over 4,600 tons of granite. Its 16-foot lantern house featured a 6-sided lantern, each with 2 Fresnel lenses, providing 2 flashes every 30 seconds. At the time, these were the largest lenses in the world. In 1894, explosive fog warning devices were added, and the bells were removed shortly after. In 1959, it was converted to electricity using a 1,250-watt incandescent lamp with new optics. The old lantern and optics were removed and were later destroyed by vandals. In 1980, a helipad was added to provide easier access for maintenance crews, and in 1982, the lighthouse became fully automated and has operated on solar power since 1999. Its light flashes every 10 seconds and is visible at up to 22 nautical miles. Its foghorn blasts 3 times every 62 seconds. Today, the James Douglas version of the Eddystone Lighthouse remains in place and is still operational after 140 years. That is going to do it for Lighthouses of the World, Volume 1. Thank you so much for listening. For ad-free access to Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs, please consider joining the Officers Club on Patreon at patreon.com/shipwreckspod or by joining the Into History Network at intohistory.com/shipwreckspod. Full-length videos for all episodes going forward can be found at youtube.com/@shipwreckspod. Please remember to subscribe. Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs is written, edited, and produced by me, Rich Napolitano. Original theme music is by Sean Siegfried, and you can follow him at seansiegfried.com. Images and sources for all episodes can be found at shipwrecksandseadogs.com, where you can also find some great merchandise, get yourself a shirt, and help support the podcast at the same time. Please join me again next time, but until then, don't forget to wear your life jackets.